what I'm seeing?
Footsteps, crack, 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 as it was passing tree. Give me the camera.
There's at least 2 Sasquatches down by the creek.
The most undeniable Bigfoot encounter always leaves behind a trace that defies explanation. We'll uncover a massive shape caught in a 2009 photograph and heavy footsteps circling a terrified hiker at dawn. Will you still believe we are alone after seeing this? In 2024, a hiker set out along a secluded path through the California foothills near Shaver Lake. The ground was damp from recent rainfall, and sunlight pushed through the tree canopy in long, narrow beams. He spent the afternoon fishing with his guard entirely down. At some point, he leaned his catch against a nearby rock and took a quick photo. Nothing intentional, just a casual shot. That evening, back home and reviewing his pictures under better lighting, something stopped him cold. Deep in the tree line behind where he had stood, barely visible yet unmistakably upright, was a figure. It was positioned within natural cover, completely still, at a distance of roughly 40 yards. Some analysts who looked at the image described its posture as consistent with a female primate carrying an infant on one hip. Others argued it was nothing more than overlapping branches and shadow playing tricks. But the part nobody disagreed on was the implication. He never went back to that trail. Something that stays hidden rather than flees suggests it felt no threat, or was evaluating. We still don't know what it was. Do you think it was watching out of curiosity, or something else? 2 hunters were recording in the remote wilderness of Idaho when they suddenly stopped, as if they had just noticed something that shouldn't have been there. They quickly aimed their cameras toward the forest ahead, not because they had seen it clearly, but because whatever it was that had just crossed the frame had such an unusual shape that they couldn't ignore it.
Give me the camera. Oh. I tripped. I tripped. What was that? I told you that wasn't a freaking bear. What was that?
It wasn't a bear.
Oh my God. Listen.
Did you get it?
I don't even know what that was.
Did you get it on film?
Yeah, I know I got it on film before you took the camera away from me.
It didn't remain still and didn't stay visible for long. It only appeared briefly between the trees, and then disappeared. But the way it moved was unlike a normal run or walk, making it impossible for them to identify it as any familiar animal. To this day, there is still no clear explanation for what appeared in the footage, and no one truly knows what they saw. Maybe it was only there for a second, but something about the way it moved in that wilderness didn't feel normal. So, what do you think it really was? In 2022, a family hiking near a remote waterfall stopped to rest at the base, taking in the cold spray. They were recording casually when something appeared in the background of their footage. Through the curtain of falling water, a silhouette moved along the ridge above them, hunched forward, moving steadily on 2 legs, with a torso far too wide for any hiker carrying a backpack. They didn't notice it until later. By the time they stopped filming and gathered their things, the figure had already disappeared beyond the ridgeline. Skeptics suggested it was a large hiker with gear, but frame-by-frame analysis showed a shape whose proportions went beyond any reasonable human outline. Whatever it was had been crossing the ridge directly above the family the entire time they rested below, fully exposed and completely unaware anything was watching. The width of that silhouette is hard to explain away with a backpack alone. Some shapes just don't match what we know. What do you think was moving along that ridge? Meet Sarah, the creator behind Salish Sasquatch, a channel built around sharing evidence and first-hand encounters with Bigfoot. In her videos, she moves through the dense forests of Washington state, documenting strange sounds, unexplained footprints, and unsettling sightings.
My heart was pounding like really bad, and I didn't know what was going on. Footsteps, crack, 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 as it was passing trees.
A ride through Morton on mini bikes alongside her guide, Stephen Marcus, would soon remind her that in these woods, no one is ever truly alone.
Welcome to Salish Sasquatch, where we share evidence as well as encounters. This area is very well known in the Bigfoot community in Washington State for Sasquatch activity. I'm going to link that down below. That's a very well-known account about two people that were hired to, and they had a lot of activity transpire. So I'm going to link that below. Stephen Marcus today, and we are going to take you along for the ride and tell you about an encounter that happened in March of 2022.
Morton, Washington is widely recognized within the Bigfoot research community as an area with significant Sasquatch activity. The channel had previously featured a well-known account called The Night Watchman, a documented report involving two individuals hired to guard logging equipment on a nearby hill, during which a series of unusual events unfolded. That video is linked for reference. Today, Stephen Marcus joins as guide for a ride into the area tied to an encounter from March of 2022. On March 26th, Jonathan and roughly a dozen friends gathered for a night at an old quarry. Two trailers sat quietly in the darkness, while a fire threw moving shadows across the clearing. The group settled in, talking and laughing, with no reason to expect anything unusual.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll go along with it. We'll see what's happening here. But at the same time, some of these guys were track specialists who follow footprints and the sounds and all the different things, all these different experts at their fields out here.
But one camper seated slightly apart from the others was about to witness something the night had been quietly holding back. Without warning, a sharp clatter cut across the road. Jonathan and a companion caught it immediately, a sound that never reached the rest of the group, shielded as they were by the trailer. Not long after, word came over the radio that at least two Sasquatches had been spotted down by the creek.
After the gentleman that I was sitting by, that it made me aware of the rock clacking, and then he radios over and he goes, "There's at least two Sasquatches down by the creek." And so I'm scurrying to go get my phone, and when I start walking down the road right here, that's when there's these two power knocks. It sounded like two gunshots, but it wasn't gunshots, it was just...
The group scrambled for gear and phones. Then came two knocks, enormous, concussive, carrying through the dark like gunshots, but unmistakably something else. For several tense minutes, the knocking moved through the trees, deliberate and measured, as though something hidden was making itself known on its own terms. Then movement. One of Jonathan's companions froze as a wave of dread passed through the group.
So I'm not 100% positive where the Sasquatch was last seen, and from the version that I had heard was that when the guy was like, "Oh, I'm gonna run after him and try to film him," and I was also told by some of the guys that were watching the monitor, the guy who's chasing him, he's falling all over the place. They could see that through thermal.
No one was certain where to look or what direction to move. The possibility that something massive and unseen was out there, watching, closing in, hung over all of them.
Crawling, and I could see him, I could see the fern starting to move, and he's starting to come down, and he's starting to go back this direction. As he's coming by, I see the guy who was first chasing the Bigfoot, and I told him, I said, "Hey, he's moving right up there." And he goes, "Yeah, okay, sure." I thought, okay, well, I don't know who these guys are anyway, so whatever.
Footage captured from above eventually revealed a figure beside a tree. Only a portion of it was visible, the left side and part of the back exposed at a slight angle. One arm hung in an unusual position, bent and heavy. The torso was broad and powerfully built.
I see it's going down this direction, and it's only about, as I'm coming up this way, I see Steve walking down, and it's coming across right by Steve. I know, I can't believe we saw that. And I thought, oh my God, I can't believe we both saw this thing. And we were just all excited because we didn't know what to do at that point. Then we went back into camp.
Its proportions unlike anything in the frame around it. It occupied the space beside the tree the way a solid, immovable object would, towering, dense, and completely out of scale with its surroundings. For the witness, it was a first encounter, disorienting, impossible to dismiss, and impossible to forget. Just after dawn the following morning, he was pulled from sleep by a rapid series of sharp cracking sounds moving through the trees. Faint at first, they multiplied quickly and seemed to come from multiple directions at once, forming what felt like a triangle of sound closing in around the camp.
And I was so excited. This was my very first experience and introduction to collecting audio for Sasquatch. And everyone was telling me I have to use it. So I finally used it. I turned it on, went to bed around 2 o'clock in the morning. About 6:30, I think, in the morning, I got woken up and I start hearing something cracking on a tree.
An audio recorder left running in the tent caught fragments of it. The sounds were faint on playback, but in the moment they were loud, close, and unlike anything he had heard across years of time spent in the woods.
As I'm laying there in my sleeping bag, I can hear sounds going off behind me towards the direction of my feet, that way in the woods, and then over to the right. It was like a perfect triangle. Fortunately, I caught this all on my audio. It's not great, but it's there, and you can kind of hear it. And Marcus is sleeping. He finally wakes up, and I'm like thinking I'm the only one hearing this.
After everything that unfolded over those hours, the knocks, the figure in the thermal footage, the sounds at dawn, one question stayed with everyone who was there. How close did they actually come to something most people will never encounter at all? Something that announces itself with knocking, allows itself to be partially seen, then disappears before anyone can get close. That pattern shows up across many accounts. It raises questions about intent that don't have easy answers. What do you think it was doing out there that night? Warning them or something else? A man hiking alone through an unnamed forest in the United States heard something heavy shifting in the branches above him. He stopped, raised his phone, and began recording. Clinging to the upper canopy was a dark, primate-like shape, completely still, as though it had been there long before he ever walked beneath it. Then slowly, it began to move.
Whoa, see what I'm seeing?
He cut the recording and backed away quickly. When the footage was reviewed frame by frame, analysts noticed a subtle visual shift occurring at the exact moment the figure started moving. That detail raised a question that was never resolved, whether the shape had been digitally inserted, or whether the camera simply lost focus tracking a distant object through dense branches. Do you think what he filmed was real or something else entirely? In 2009, a hiker in a Utah forest took a photograph that has never been adequately explained. The image is grainy. Phone cameras in 2009 produced poor results in low light, and AI generation did not exist. But despite the low quality, the shape in the frame is difficult to dismiss. Broad shoulders, a domed head, thick legs planted at the edge of a clearing. What makes this photograph significant isn't entirely what it shows. It's what was impossible at the time it was taken. In 2009, there was no available technology capable of convincingly fabricating what appears in that image. No app, no filter, no generative model. Just a hiker, a poor camera, and something standing at the tree line that had no business being there. Bad cameras don't lie the same way good ones can be manipulated. In 2009, faking something that clean wasn't really possible, which is exactly why this image keeps coming up. What do you think was standing at that tree line? On May 18, 2025, a man named Edward Henry and his 12-year-old son were fishing at Plum Creek. The air was still, the water moved slowly, the kind of afternoon that feels quiet and contained. Then the brush on the far bank began crashing. Edward assumed a deer was pushing through the undergrowth. But the sound didn't stop. It grew heavier, closer, more deliberate. Something was moving toward the creek with real force. Then it stepped out of the tree line. A massive bipedal figure, fully upright, with arms that hung past its waist and shoulders, wider than any person Edward had ever seen. It walked along the bank with a slow, rolling stride, unhurried, unbothered, as though the two people standing 30 yards away with a phone pointed at it were no more noteworthy than the rocks in the stream. Edward recorded everything he could. The creature never turned toward them. It never picked up its pace. It moved entirely on its own terms until the trees closed around it and it was gone. Edward looked at his son. His son looked back. They packed up without saying anything. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization reviewed the footage and called it credible. The gait and limb proportions didn't match any known animal in the region. Some have since called it one of the clearest sightings in years. The size is one thing. The indifference is harder to explain. Do you think it even registered them at all? A carpenter hiking alone through a Pacific Northwest forest had a rear-facing GoPro mounted on his pack. He walked for over an hour with no sense that anything unusual had happened. Later, reviewing the footage at home, he saw it. A broad-shouldered figure, partially hidden behind a tree trunk, leaning out just enough to watch him pass. It held its position. It never followed. It simply observed, with the kind of stillness that suggested this wasn't the first time. He shared the video online. He hasn't been back to that trail since. A figure that leans out to watch but never moves closer. That's a specific kind of behavior. It wasn't startled, and it wasn't hiding. Do you think it was curious, or did it already know exactly what he was? In 2023, the YouTube channel Into the Wild released footage pulled from a wildlife corridor webcam inside a Canadian national park. A machinery operator was clearing trails while the camera logged routine time-lapse images throughout the day. The first 2 frames showed nothing but trees and snow. In the third, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Upright, unusually wide at the shoulders, positioned between 2 trunks as though it had stepped forward just enough to watch the man work. In the very next frame, it was gone. It had pulled back the moment it risked being seen more clearly. Viewers who compared its size against the surrounding trees estimated a height well over 7 feet. But what unsettled most people wasn't the size, it was the timing. The figure appeared only when the operator was alone, focused on his work, with his back turned. It vanished the instant exposure became a possibility. That isn't the behavior of an animal wandering into frame. That's observation. Deliberate, calculated, and patient. Something that tracks a person's attention and moves only when that person isn't looking. That takes a kind of awareness most people don't expect to find out there. Do you think it knew what the camera was, or was it only watching the man? This profile follows Peter Byrne, a man whose pursuit of Bigfoot stretches back more than 6 decades. Born in Ireland, Byrne's path took him far from home, pulled forward by a drive to find answers to questions most people never think to ask. In the 1950s, a connection with a pioneering Texan researcher set his course, leading him from the forests of North America all the way to the Himalayas, and cementing his place as one of the most enduring figures in the field.
1956, with correspondence with a Texan whose name was Tom Slick, projecting a full-time research in the Himalaya. I am Irish. I grew up in Ireland.
That Texan was Tom Slick, a bold, obsessive searcher fixated on the Yeti. Together, Byrne and Slick moved through the jagged Himalayan terrain for 3 years, chasing shadows and following legends across frozen ridges and hidden valleys.
Was trekking in the Himalaya, a small expedition to look for with this Texan called Tom Slick, this oil man. He became a very good friend. Do a full-time search for the Yeti in the Himalaya, 3 years.
When that chapter ended, Slick pointed Byrne west, across the ocean to America, where a different creature and a different set of forests were waiting. Byrne had never set foot in the United States. The image he held of America was skyscrapers and highways, nothing like what he was about to walk into. But the pull of unexplored wilderness was something he already understood, and he signed on.
So to make a long story short, I signed up with him. I spent 3 years in the Himalaya looking for the Yeti. He invited me to come to the States. He said, you spent enough time up there, come to the States and look for Bigfoot. To me, America was skyscrapers and freeways. But I came over here and got into the search for Bigfoot.
January 1960 marked the shift from Yeti to Bigfoot, and Byrne never looked back. His earlier years had been spent as a big game hunter, working primarily across northern India and the jungles of southern Nepal, a stretch of terrain running 500 miles east to west and 50 miles deep, dense with elephant and rhino, both protected and untouched. That work had sharpened his instincts, tracking, sign reading, understanding how animals moved and where they left traces. All of it transferred directly into his approach to Bigfoot research.
When I was big game hunting, partly in North India, but mostly in southern Nepal, the jungles of southern Nepal, 50 miles north to south, there were elephant everywhere, lots of elephant. We did not shoot elephant. So that's when I first got into Bigfoot. And that was 1956. 57, 58, 59 was the Yeti, and then Bigfoot, January 1960, starting here.
After his Himalayan expeditions, Byrne established a Bigfoot research base in northern Oregon. It was modest, a trailer set beside a local restaurant, but it drew people in. Visitors arrived with sightings to report, cautious and curious, and Byrne worked through their accounts carefully, documenting only what held up.
In that part of Asia, the elephant is one of the Hindu gods, shot an elephant. The other animal which was protected was the rhino, which was kind of the preserves of the royal family of Nepal. So those two animals we didn't shoot. My clients would contact me and tell me what they wanted, usually tiger, and I would set up the arrangement before they came.
When the operation later moved to Hood River, that same process continued, and what had started as a small outpost grew into something more. A concentrated record of first-hand encounters from ordinary people with no reason to fabricate what they described. Across all those decades, Byrne personally found only 6 sets of footprints. He never encountered the creature itself. But through hundreds of witness interviews, he assembled a body of accounts that he found more compelling than physical evidence alone. The stories told by people he judged credible became the foundation of his conviction.
That were credible out of that, and those are in my book. I recorded them. So that was the purpose of the information center. As a big game hunter, were useful, and one was sign reading on the ground, so that when bigfooting, we'd see something, I could look at it. I learned tracking and sign reading.
One account stood apart. Witnesses described a figure over 7 feet tall, dark brown, moving upright with a stride unlike anything they could place. It came within roughly 200 yards, then stopped. It turned toward them. For a moment, it held still, arms out, watching. Then turned again and walked back into the trees without any sign of alarm. Byrne's interpretation was considered. The noise of nearby machinery had likely disturbed it and set it moving before it could identify the source, a response consistent with how large wild animals behave when they can't locate a sound. Throughout his career, Byrne operated at the boundary between doubt and belief. He welcomed skeptics. He understood the field was not widely accepted. Only a small number of scientists ever took it seriously. But the mystery, as far as Byrne was concerned, had never been dismissed, only deferred.
So the thing walked up to about 200 yards away, stopped, looked at them, turned and walked away. 7 feet tall at least, 400 to 450 pounds, enormous, swinging its arms, walking upright, and when it stopped like this with its hands out. So the sighting is extremely unusual in that the time of the day, the people. So my theory there is that noise of the machinery got it up, which happens with wild animals very often. They can't pinpoint sound.
After 6 decades of footprints followed and witnesses heard, the question he kept returning to was a simple one. How close is it really? And what would you do if you were suddenly standing in front of it? A hunter who spent years reading animal sign in some of the densest wilderness on Earth, and who still couldn't find the thing he was looking for. That says something about what kind of animal this might be, if it exists at all. Byrne never claimed certainty. He just kept showing up. What do you think kept him out there for 60 years? Evidence or something harder to name? That's all for tonight's video. Which encounter gave you chills? Let us know in the comments below. Got your own experience? We want to hear it. And whatever you do, don't miss what's coming next.